Chapter 46. I had no idea, she said with wide eyes, which is why Muggle studies will be taught by someone who is intimately familiar with the Muggle world. I understand, she nodded. I'll take the history job. Excellent. I will have guidelines for you within 48 hours for you to plan your syllabus by, Severus told her. Moving on, Hagrid. You will remain the instructor for the 6th and 7th years in care of magical creatures, but you will work with the 3rd through 5th year instructor on your syllabus. You will also be training to get your mastery in the subject, funded by the school. You will have 5 years to obtain the mastery or be replaced as a teacher. Should that happen, you will, of course, be welcome to return to your job as groundskeeper. Since it normally took 2 years to get a mastery, it was more than generous. Even with his teaching duties, he should easily be able to get it in 5 years. What about a wand? Hagrid couldn't help but ask. He'd been under the impression that any further education would be impossible with his expulsion. While we are aware that you were not the one to open the Chamber of Secrets, you were technically expelled for raising an acromantula in the castle, Snape pointed out, having looked up the records himself. He did have a soft spot for Hagrid. The gentle giant loved the students deeply and was always the first to jump in to help them. He had saved Severus from the marauders more than once when he saw them attacking him. Still, the idea of him with a wand was nerve-wracking. I understand, Hagrid said sadly. He was still glad he was getting the opportunity he was. We will be adding 2 new classes to the curriculum. All students will take them for the next year or 2, but from then, first years will take wizarding studies, which will focus on the old ways and the nature of magic. First and second years will take critical thinking. For too long have wizards and witches simply followed the leader and not learned to think for themselves. No longer will, because that's the way it is, be an acceptable answer. For a society to flourish, people need to be able to think, to innovate, to create. This is something that will be included in all classes as well. You will encourage students to reason their way to answers rather than just parrot them from a book. That is something that I attempt to instill in all of my students for the little bit of time I have them, Phileas nodded. He was a Ravenclaw after all. There was a lot more he could do with that now, since he had the backing of the new headmaster. He tried for a while to score students better when they reasoned, but Albus had overridden him. Said that the correct answer was worth more no matter how they arrived at it. Severus gave him a grateful nod for the support before continuing. There will be new standards in all classes. Dark magic, hereby renamed as free magic, will be incorporated into the classes in addition to light magic, now known as intent magic. Contrary to many opinions, free magic is not bad. It is simply a different type of magic. For those of you not aware, the Patronus charm is of that type. Naturally, we won't be teaching harmful magic of either type, save for a small amount in defense. To that end, I have outlined the basics that will be taught in the core classes, he said, sliding parchments over to Minerva and Phileas as the only current casting teachers. This is simply to give you an idea of what will be taught at all years. You will both only be teaching the 6th and 7th years, so when you modify your syllabi, focus on those years first, though you are free to assist with the syllabi for the other teachers. That goes for all of you. I've never thought that the ban on dark magic, free magic made sense, Phileas admitted. I am beginning to see that many things I once thought were incorrect, Minerva said with a sigh. I will comply for the time being, but you can expect me to do my own research on the subject. I would expect nothing less. In the coming weeks, there will be many lost resources available on that subject, including books written by the founders and Merlin. Tom had spent time in the Chamber of Secrets making copies of every book in the library there and leaving the originals in place. He'd had someone making more copies of all the books ever since, and the shipment for the school library should be in by the end of the week, and 1 copy of each would be placed in the staff room for the near future so that the teachers wouldn't have to fight the students for copies. Where were they found? Madam Pince asked, nearly salivating at the thought. There was a perfectly preserved library in the Chamber of Secrets. Minister Riddle spent much of the last month in there making duplicates of all of the books, and has now passed the duplication process off to others for more copies. The library here will get 10 copies of most of them. There are some that are not appropriate for a school and will be kept only in the ministry's restricted section and the Department of Mysteries. There are some others that will be in the restricted section here. Most of them are appropriate for all students, though. I will recommend 2 books to begin with for the wand-based classes on the nature of magic, including light and dark. We would appreciate that. Thank you, Minerva told him. I will pass out more detailed copies of the coming plans, but will continue with an overview for now. All classes will have smaller class sizes and more sessions. This is why we are hiring so many more staff. All practical-based classes will have at least 3 teachers. 4 for potions, which will have the smallest class sizes due to the danger of the subject. The rest of the classes will have 2 teachers per subject. If any of you have any recommendations for those positions, feel free to write them and encourage them to apply. I will be looking over the recommended applications first, so be sure that you tell them to put down that you recommended them. The same for the rest of the positions that will be available, such as the deputy and heads of house. We will also be adding a second librarian and expanding the library to not only add more relevant reference books, but also a fiction section for recreational reading. Irma Pince didn't look too happy about that, but didn't object at least, so he moved on. Rolanda, you will be in charge of purchasing 50 new model trainer brooms. These will be replaced every 10 years, as will the school-use brooms which you will purchase 100 of. These brooms will not be Firebolts or the newest model, but older models such as the Nimbus 2000 or the Cleansweep 9s. You would know better than I which models are best for which Quidditch positions, and I expect you to get an appropriate variety. For example, there should be more chaser brooms than keeper brooms, since there are more chasers on a team. I see what you mean, Hooch said with a gleam in her eye. And we can afford all this. With the Founders' vaults claimed and opened, yes. Both Lord Gryffindor and Lord Slytherin have pledged those vaults to the running of the school with an eye towards longevity. Those vaults will take a dent for this year with the overhaul, and the fact that they will be paying for any children who cannot afford to come. By next year, they hope to have a better idea of the normal running costs and have a scholarship program available that will not deplete them, but still allow every child in the Isles to have an education at least to owls. Do you think I could request new telescopes? Aurora Sinastra asked hopefully. The Muggle telescopes are much more powerful and accurate, but they're too expensive to ask the students to purchase them. If I could have enough for the classes, though. That was discussed as a possibility, but first we are looking into the idea of finding a spell to create a planetarium effect indoors. If that is not possible by the end of the year, then I'm certain due consideration would be given to that request, Severus told her. Thank you, she said gratefully. That was far more than Albus ever promised, and the idea of getting her own planetarium was a dream come true. Chapter 47. Irma, I will need you to work on a plan to reorganize the library. All sections will need to be expanded to approximately double, and the new fiction section will need to be the size of the current library. I will also need a list of all texts currently in the restricted section to see what can now be moved to the main section. Bathsheba and Septima I would like you to work on a better warding scheme for the restricted section of the library, and also add wards around the edge of the Forbidden Forest and the Whomping Willow that will only allow students past when accompanied by a teacher. The runes and arithmancy masters would be the best at that job in the absence of actual ward masters, which he didn't have time to hire and oversee. We already have quite a few ideas that we've asked Albus for years to allow us to implement, Bathsheba babbling told him. Well, you now have permission to do so, Severus nodded gratefully. Which brings me to my next order of business. There has been a lot going on in this school that is no longer acceptable. And yes, I'm aware that in at least some of these cases I have been guilty of such in the past as well. Going forward, this is a school. The primary goal of every one of us here should be the safety, education, and well-being of the children within these walls. There will no longer be any threatening of students. He looked at Filch seriously. There will be no verbal abuse, no predictions of their deaths, no derogatory comments outside of what is professionally required as a result of their work. There will be no detentions in the Forbidden Forest at night, no detentions lasting after curfew period. Bullying, verbal or otherwise, will no longer be given a slap on the wrist. Attacks will be treated as such, and when necessary auras will be called. Here are copies for everyone of both the student and teacher code of conduct, along with applicable punishments which will be enforced equally for everyone. There's nothing in here about points, Pomona noticed as she flipped through. That brings me to my next order of business. It was pointed out to me that the point system is inherently flawed. I put it all to you for ideas to resolve these flaws. Should we continue with something like it, that will be added into the codes of conduct? Flawed how? Minerva asked. Punishing the entire house for the actions of one student is demoralizing. You may have a model student doing everything they are supposed to, earning points for correct answers and helping others, and then everything they've earned can be lost in one stupid incident by someone else. Then come the vagaries of different teachers, assigning different numbers of points for the same thing, many even favoring certain students or houses over others in the process. Then you have the prefects giving and taking points on a whim. Perhaps set values of points across the board would help, Phileas suggested. And the heads of house can review the points given or taken by the prefects. What if each student has their own points, which are then tabulated for the house cup? Septima Vector suggested, and the students with the top points in their house, or even by year, could get some sort of prize at the end of the year, or a party. Slughorn chimed in excitedly. We could give prizes to the top students academically for the year as well, Minerva chimed in. All of those ideas are reasonable, Severus said with a nod. But would it be possible to have the points tabulate by student and not just by house? It would require some reworking of the hourglasses and some tweaking of the wards that record the points, but it should be possible, Bathsheba said thoughtfully. Then I will work on setting a system for the points. We will reward the top point earner per house per year and the top 5 in the school. The same for the academic standings. I want everyone to be thinking of ideas for rewards for each level and submit them to me within 2 weeks. What about Quidditch? Minerva asked, wondering what all the new brooms were for. Each house will field 2 Quidditch teams, one for 2nd through 4th years and one for 5th through 7th years. Junior team students can move up to the senior team early should they be skilled enough, but senior students cannot join the junior team. This is for safety with the larger and stronger students, and so that the junior team stays for them and we don't end up with 2 senior teams. Students 2nd year and up will be permitted to play pickup games when the pitch isn't in use. Additionally, 1st years will be permitted to fly during once-weekly sessions supervised by Rolanda. It will be her decision on a case-by-case basis when the 1st years will graduate from the trainer brooms to using the school brooms. He would be putting a lot more work on the flying coach with this, but given that she pulled a full salary for nothing but a handful of lessons for 1st years and refereeing most Quidditch games, it was about time she earned her pay. I would be happy to do so. I would have suggested that years ago if not for the poor quality of the brooms. The longer the students were on them, the more chances for dangerous failures, Rolanda said with a nod. Additional changes will be that students 3rd year and up will get 1 Hogsmeade visit per month. With the additional staff for supervision, this is feasible now. 1st and 2nd years will get 3 visits per year, accompanied at all times by a teacher in groups of 10 preferably, but no more than 15. 7th years are all of age and will be permitted to go to Hogsmeade at any time classes aren't in session, provided they are back in their common rooms by curfew. They must submit a written request no less than 48 hours in advance should they wish to go further than Hogsmeade or be gone overnight. These requests will be considered on a case-by-case basis by their head of house and will not be granted for frivolous reasons. All of these privileges will be subject to being revoked should they have behavioral or academic issues. You're right, that wouldn't have been possible before with the low staff numbers, but it should be with more teachers, Phileas nodded. And with heads of house staying on top of their students' performance. That was my thinking as well, Severus nodded. We will also be open to clubs and activities outside the classroom. If any of you wish to create one, just submit a proposal. If your students wish to create one, you are free to sponsor it if you wish. Again, just submit to me a proposal. To be official, a club must have a faculty sponsor, and they will not discriminate in their membership aside from age when that is valid. I've always wanted to start a dueling club, Phileas said excitably, and a charms club. There are so many different charms that we simply don't have time to get to in classes. The same with runes. There are so many possibilities, but we don't have time to get more than the basics across to the students during class. I would love to have a club dealing with fun and whimsical applications, or even just practical everyday uses, Bathsheba said happily. I would suggest waiting until a few weeks into the year before making any firm decisions. See how things settle out and what your time management looks like with all the changes, Severus told them. That is a wise suggestion, Minerva said, her mind already running through possibilities as well. With more time available, though, she could teach her students to love transfiguration again rather than see it as a chore. Now the last order of business for today, something that I'm sure you will all be happy with. The new contracts, with better pay, he said as he passed out the new contracts to everyone. Less work and more pay, Pomona said with wide eyes as she looked over the contract. Please ensure that you make note of the new clauses for professionalism as well, Severus said, wanting them to be sure what they were signing and not get lost in the galleons running through their minds. Filch was the first to set it aside and say, I would like to tender my resignation. It was bad enough being around the brats day in, day out, but without being able to threaten or insult them, having to be nice to them, he couldn't bear that. Very well. You may remain in the castle until September 1st if needed to allow you time to make other arrangements, Severus told him. He'd been expecting that really, and Filch's job wasn't exactly necessary anymore either. The house elves did all of the maintenance, and his primary purpose was patrolling the halls. With more teachers available and heads of house ensuring their students were in by curfew, it was no longer needed. He would have found other duties for the man who had never lived anywhere but the school if necessary, but he wasn't complaining about the resignation. It didn't take long for all the teachers to have their new contracts signed, and the meeting broke up as they went to see to their tasks, including owling people to encourage them to apply. In the coming day, quite a few people would find themselves getting more than one owl for the same purpose, but that was to be expected. Chapter 48. Tom Riddle left the press conference and immediately went to his new office where he had spent almost all of the last 36 hours. He dozed off on the desk for a little while, but didn't have time for much more. He hoped that they at least managed to clear an administrator or two soon. He understood starting from the top and working the way down, but he could really use the help. He'd made Lucius his senior undersecretary, of course, but that was a political position, not an administrative one. That was where Lucius' strengths lied. He had the general plans for the shake-up, but no one to do any of the jobs yet. Instead, he was spending his time going through the interrogation reports of the ministry employees. He knew that he could have one of his other people do that and make the decisions. He wanted to be sure that this was done right and nothing was overlooked that would come back at him later. Once the initial work was done, he would be able to relax more. About half of the reports were skimmed and then stamped as approved. For the moment, Lucius was his runner, taking stacks of the files down to the holding cells to let the people go. Of the remaining half, most were marked for further questioning with a list of topics for the questioning to cover. There were two categories for the rest: to be arrested and to attempt to reason with before arresting. Tom wasn't worrying about crimes such as bribes and intimidation, though it was being made clear that such things would no longer be acceptable. His people were already pardoned for actions they'd taken under his orders, as were people on the other side of the war for their actions as such. It was other crimes that he was looking for, child abuse in particular, including one Dolores Umbridge who would likely never see the light of day again. In the approval stack, he wasn't looking for competence. Yet, he would weed those out later. His first priority was securing the peace. The to be reasoned with pile was the most complicated. The fact that others would have attempted to reason with them before they even made it to his desk meant that by this point he would have to do so himself. There were only a few that were useful enough to go to the trouble with helped. He had hopes that the press conference, which was also broadcast into the holding cells, would help as well, particularly with his next interview. Kingsley Shacklebolt was led into the room at one point by Amelia Bones, his first conversation after the cleanup. She handed him Kingsley's wand as his personal guards took their place behind and beside him. "Thank you, Director Bones. You're welcome to stay and observe." "I think I will, yes," Amelia agreed, hoping that it would make Kingsley more comfortable. Now, Mr. Shacklebolt, you're an experienced and decorated aura. Judging by your file, you are one of the most competent in the department. As such, we would hate to see you go. We would hate even more to see you in Azkaban. While I can forgive your attack during the initial fracas due to the circumstances, the continual threats of more violence cannot stand. I have dedicated my life to fighting evil. I will not work for the most evil of all, Kingsley said seriously. And yet, as you no doubt heard during the press conference, you did work for the most evil of all. Albus Dumbledore is to blame for the entire war. All of the atrocities committed were a direct result of his plans and manipulations. He took a wide-eyed idealistic orphan and turned him into a monster, intentionally. How? Kingsley asked. That much has been said, but I won't believe it until I can understand it. And that is why you are valued enough to be here rather than awaiting trial, Tom said with a wry smile. This is not for public consumption, understand, if for no other reason than to keep others from attempting it. Kingsley nodded in acceptance. When I entered the wizarding world at 11, I was sorted into Slytherin for my ambition. My ambition to leave the world a better place than I found it. At that age, my main focus was on preventing anyone else from dealing with the bullying and outright abuse that I had been subjected to my whole life, but obviously that view expanded as I got older and learned more. Tom offered the man tea before continuing, but Kingsley declined, likely worried about being drugged somehow, but Tom just shrugged it off. I was sent back to the orphanage every summer, during the middle of the Muggle World War II. When London, where my orphanage was under constant bombing. Many of the other children in the orphanage died over the course of those 2 summers. I was injured more than once. Once seriously, and only my magic saved me. Of course that just increased the abuse that I was subject to from the others. More proof of my freakishness. Needless to say, by the time I came back for my 6th year, I had developed quite the fear of death. Completely understandable, Bones said thoughtfully, having not heard this story before herself. She had been easier to convince for a variety of reasons. Quite. And rather than counsel a young boy who had been through such atrocities, Albus Dumbledore instead guided me to a book, one that I later learned had been removed from the library many years before and only planted for me to find. In that book, I learned of Horcruxes, that they would supposedly prevent one from dying. It required a sacrifice, though. I never intended for Myrtle Malone to die. I had been visiting the Chamber of Secrets, having recently found the library. The only way up the passage was to ride the basilisk, who was there as a guardian to the school, not to destroy it. I didn't realize that she was in the bathroom. Everyone should have been in class. When she died, I couldn't bring her back, but I could at least make her death good for something. I used her to make my first Horcrux. What exactly is a Horcrux? Kingsley asked. It is an old and esoteric magic that involves splitting off a portion of your soul and encasing it in an object. According to the book I read, it would anchor your soul to this world and not allow you to die. What I was not aware of was that they don't work. That was why they fell out of use. The soul piece can possess others. In some situations, even use their life force to create a body. But then they are just as mortal as anyone else, and the primary soul piece, the true self, will still die. Only the worst parts of oneself that split off could survive, at least until they were killed. Dumbledore knew all this when he planted that book. So you've been insane since you were 16, Kingsley said skeptically. Not exactly. The one soul piece made me colder, more prone to anger, less inclined to mercy, but it wasn't that bad. It was during my 7th year that a conversation with Professor Slughorn, likely prompted by Dumbledore, led me to believe that 7 pieces of my soul would be the most beneficial. Clearly, the conversation had to have been prompted elsewhere, given that the magic had been forbidden a long time ago and almost completely eradicated. When I left Hogwarts, I searched high and low for more information and came up blank. Nevertheless, that conversation stuck with me. At that time, I didn't intend to make any more, though. I wasn't a murderer, not yet. But you became one, Kingsley said distastefully. Unfortunately, yes, but not for a long time. I had so many plans to help the wizarding world, but my plans didn't fit with Dumbledore's plans of domination, and I was just a poor half-blood orphan. When he blocked me at every turn, going so far as preventing me from even getting a job, I ended up working in Borgin and Burke's as the only job I could get. I've learned recently that I had a compulsion on me to not go to Gringotts to find my heritage. He feared the influence I would wield with the power of the Slytherin and Peveril lordships behind me, so he sought to marginalize me as much as possible. Ever since I was at Hogwarts, he would tell everyone that would listen that I was a bad seed. My next Horcrux was created 2 years later, when you killed again. Yes, I had been visiting an old woman for my job, attempting to convince her to part with some heirlooms. I recognized one of the pieces as Slytherin's locket. I had found enough of my family by then to know that it had last been in possession of my mother while she was pregnant with me, so I began to subtly question her about it. She mocked the worthless tramp that had sold it for a pittance just to feed herself and her bastard baby. Everyone in the room gasped in horror at that. I was filled with rage, enhanced by the creation of my first Horcrux, and before I knew it, I had cast the killing curse at her. Once again, I used the unintentional death to my advantage and created a second Horcrux. It wasn't until the next day when I had calmed down that I regretted her death. The creation of the second Horcrux changed me even more, though. I decided that I was done trying to do things the right way, the legal way. I needed more power. I needed to be powerful enough that no one could stop me from saving the world, whether they liked it or not.